My name is Rebecca Torres, and I never thought I'd be standing in my childhood bedroom at 35, packing everything I owned into boxes while my mother sobbed downstairs. The text message that started it all still glowed on my phone. Emergency family meeting. Be here by 6 p.m. or don't bother coming at all. From my father, of course. He'd always been one for ultimatums. Before I tell you how I went from successful marketing director to family pariah in one explosive evening, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If you've ever been the family scapegoat or had to choose between your sanity and keeping the peace, this story is for you. Hit that like button and subscribe, because what happened next will show you exactly why sometimes walking away is the only way to save yourself. Growing up as the middle child in the Lawson family meant I was either invisible or in trouble. My older sister Victoria was the golden child, straight A's, perfect boyfriend, never caused a moment's worry. My younger brother Nathan was the baby who could do no wrong, charming his way out of every mistake with a smile and a joke. And then there was me, Rebecca, the one who asked too many questions, challenged too many rules, and apparently existed to be everyone's emotional punching bag. My mother, Patricia, had always been fragile, the kind of woman who took to her bed with migraines whenever conflict arose. My father, Michael, ruled the household with an iron fist disguised as concerned parenting. "I'm only hard on you because I see potential," he'd say after another lecture about my choices, my attitude, my failure to live up to the family standards. Those standards, I learned early, didn't apply equally to all three children. When Victoria got caught cheating on her SATs, it was handled quietly, a family crisis that required understanding and support. The guidance counselor was called, meetings were held behind closed doors, and within a week the whole incident had been swept under the rug with a story about a medical emergency that had affected her test performance. When Nathan wrecked his car drunk driving at 17, Dad pulled strings to keep it off his record, hiring an expensive lawyer and calling in favors from his golf buddies who worked in the legal system. The car was replaced within a month, and Nathan was back to his regular weekend parties with barely a slap on the wrist. But when I came home 10 minutes after curfew my senior year because my debate team meeting had run late, I was grounded for a month and given daily lectures about responsibility and respect. When I forgot to call home during a college trip that ran over schedule, I received 3 hours of screaming phone calls about how worried they'd been, how selfish I was, and how this was typical of my thoughtless behavior. The double standard was so obvious it was almost comical, but no one else seemed to notice or care. College was my escape, 400 miles away at the state university, studying communications and discovering who I was without the constant criticism. I thrived there, made genuine friends, found my voice. During spring break of my sophomore year, I came home excited to share my news. I'd been offered an internship at a prestigious marketing firm for the summer, competing against hundreds of applicants from across the region. "That's nice, dear," Mom said distractedly, focused on the wedding magazines spread across the kitchen table. Victoria had just gotten engaged to her college boyfriend, and apparently that was the only thing that mattered in our household anymore. "It's actually a big deal," I pressed on, setting down my backpack and joining her at the table. Only 5 students in the whole program got chosen. The experience could really help me after graduation. They said they might even offer me a full-time position if I do well. Dad looked up from his newspaper, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. "Is it paid?" "Well, no, but the experience is invaluable. I could stay with Aunt Helen in the city and take the subway to work. She already said I could use her spare room for the summer and—" "Absolutely not." He folded the paper with a sharp snap that made me jump. "I'm not paying for you to play career woman all summer while we have real responsibilities here. You'll work at Henderson's Hardware like we planned and contribute to this household." "But Dad, this could change my whole career trajectory. The connections alone." "Rebecca, enough." His voice carried that edge that meant the discussion was over. "You can chase your dreams after you've learned the value of real work. Henderson's expecting you Memorial Day, and that's final." I looked to my mother for support, but she was back to studying centerpiece options, completely absorbed in Victoria's wedding planning. "Mom? Your father's right, sweetheart. Besides, Victoria needs our help with the wedding preparations. There's so much to do, and you know how these things stress me out. Having you here to help would be such a relief." That summer, while Victoria planned her wedding with Mom's devoted assistance, I stocked shelves and rang up paint cans at Henderson's Hardware. Watching my internship opportunity go to someone else, someone whose family understood the importance of professional development, Nathan spent the summer lifeguarding at the country club, which Dad somehow considered more respectable than a marketing internship because it involved honest physical work and allowed him to network with the right sort of people. The pattern continued through college and into my 20s. Every achievement was minimized, every setback magnified. When I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in communications and a minor in business, the family dinner conversation centered on Nathan's decision to change majors for the third time, again, this time from business to liberal arts, because he'd found his passion in philosophy. When I got my first real job at a marketing agency in the city, Dad's response was, "I hope you don't let it go to your head, remember where you came from." Meanwhile, Victoria's wedding was planned like a royal coronation, with Mom crying tears of joy and Dad proudly walking her down the aisle in front of 300 guests. When Nathan finally graduated with his business degree, earned in 6 years instead of 4, with Dad quietly paying for extra semesters and tutoring, the celebration included a massive party at the country club and multiple toasts to our successful son. I learned to keep my victories small and my presents smaller. It was easier than constantly fighting for recognition that would never come. By 30, I'd built a solid career despite my family's lack of support. I was regional marketing director for a growing tech company, owned my own condo in a trendy neighborhood, and had cultivated a circle of friends who actually celebrated my successes. I'd also learned to limit my contact with my family to holidays and obligatory phone calls that left me feeling drained and inadequate. That's when I met James. James was everything my family claimed to value: successful, stable, from a good family with old money and social connections. He was a financial advisor with his own practice, drove a sensible BMW, and wore expensive suits to casual dinners. He'd gone to private school, summered at his family's lake house, and spoke knowledgeably about wine and classical music. When I brought him home for Christmas that year, I watched my parents' faces light up with an approval I'd never seen directed at me. Finally, Dad said, pulling me aside after dinner while James helped Mom clear the table, "A man who can take care of you properly, someone with breeding and prospects. When are you going to lock this down?" The assumption that I needed taking care of stung, but I was so hungry for their approval that I let it slide. James fit into the family seamlessly, bonding with Dad over golf and stock market strategies, charming Mom with compliments about her cooking and her decorating. Even Victoria and Nathan seemed impressed by his credentials and connections. For the first time in my life, I was the daughter they were proud of. James proposed 6 months later at a family barbecue, getting down on one knee in front of everyone, while Mom cried happy tears and Dad clapped him on the back like he'd just closed a major business deal. "Welcome to the family, son," he said, and I realized that James's acceptance had been assumed long before mine. The wedding planning began immediately, with Mom throwing herself into preparations with the enthusiasm she'd previously reserved for Victoria's events. Suddenly, my opinions mattered. My preferences were solicited. I was included in mother-daughter shopping trips and tearful conversations about how proud they were of the woman I'd become. I should have recognized it as conditional love. I should have seen that their acceptance was tied to James, not to me. But I was so grateful for their attention, so desperate to finally be the daughter they wanted, that I ignored every red flag. James and I had been together 8 months when the cracks started showing. He had opinions about my career. Maybe I shouldn't work such long hours. Maybe I should consider something more family-friendly after we were married. The tech industry was so unstable, he said, so male-dominated. Wouldn't I be happier in something more traditional, more suited to my temperament? He criticized my friends. They were too loud, too independent, bad influences on a woman who should be thinking about settling down. My college roommate Emma was abrasive, my work friend Lisa was too focused on career advancement, and my neighbor Kate was obviously jealous of my relationship because she was still single at 32. "You're lucky to have someone looking out for your best interests," Mom said when I mentioned James's concerns about my promotion to director level. "Men see things differently, more practically. They understand the big picture in ways we sometimes miss." When James suggested I might want to consider working part-time after the wedding, just until we started having children, of course, Dad nodded approvingly. Smart man. A woman needs to prioritize her family once she's married. Career ambitions are fine when you're young, but real fulfillment comes from building a home. The fact that I'd worked 7 years to reach director level seemed irrelevant. The fact that I loved my job, was good at it, and found it fulfilling didn't factor into their calculations. What mattered was that James wanted a wife who would be available for dinner parties and charity events, someone who could support his career advancement and eventually raise his children, and my family wholeheartedly agreed with his vision. The first major fight happened when I got an offer to speak at a national marketing conference. It was a huge honor. My campaign for a nonprofit client had won several awards, and the conference organizers wanted me to present a case study to other professionals in the field. The conference was in California, scheduled for a long weekend just 2 months before our wedding. Absolutely not, James said when I told him about the opportunity. We have the final menu tasting that weekend, and my mother is flying in specifically to meet with the florist. This is exactly what I'm talking about, Rebecca. You care more about impressing your colleagues than taking care of your family responsibilities. This is a career-making opportunity, I explained. Being selected as a speaker at this conference could open doors for years to come. The menu tasting could be rescheduled. Could it? His voice was cold now, the tone he used when he was truly angry, because I've already coordinated schedules with 3 different vendors and my parents. Are you suggesting I rearrange everyone's schedule because your little conference is more important than our wedding? My little conference? The dismissiveness in his tone made my stomach clench. James, this is my profession. This matters to me. And our marriage doesn't? He moved closer, his presence suddenly feeling overwhelming rather than comforting. Because that's what you're telling me, Rebecca. That your job is more important than the life we're building together. When I tried to explain that it wasn't either or, that I could manage both career success and marriage, he shook his head sadly. This is exactly what I was afraid of. You've been in that toxic corporate environment for so long that you've lost perspective on what really matters. The fight escalated from there, with James accusing me of being selfish and career-obsessed, and me defending my right to pursue professional opportunities. We said things that couldn't be taken back, revealed fundamental incompatibilities we'd both been ignoring. When I mentioned the fight to my mother the next day, hoping for support, her response was swift and decisive. Rebecca, you're being ridiculous, she said, her voice sharp with disapproval. James is trying to build a future with you, and you're throwing it away for some conference that won't matter 5 years from now. Do you know how many women would kill to have a man like that? Someone stable and successful who wants to take care of you. I don't need taking care of, I said quietly. I can take care of myself. That attitude is exactly the problem, Dad interjected. Apparently Mom had put me on speakerphone so he could weigh in. No man wants a wife who acts like she doesn't need him. James is trying to be a good husband and you're pushing him away with this feminist nonsense. It's not feminist nonsense to want a career, Victoria works. Victoria works part-time at a boutique, Mom corrected. Something fun and social that doesn't interfere with her real responsibilities. She understands that her husband and children come first. That's what marriage means, Rebecca. Putting your family's needs above your own wants. The conversation left me feeling confused and guilty. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe I was prioritizing the wrong things. James was offering me everything my family had always said I should want: security, stability, social status, a comfortable life. Why couldn't I just be grateful? 3 months before our scheduled wedding, I had my answer. It started with a work emergency, a major client threatening to leave unless we could present a new campaign within 48 hours. I was leading the team and we'd been working around the clock to save the account worth over $2 million to our company. When James called complaining that I'd missed our dinner reservation with his parents, I finally reached my breaking point. This is my job, James, my career. Sometimes that means missing dinner. This is exactly what I'm talking about, he said coldly. You care more about impressing your boss than taking care of your relationship. How do you think this will work when we have children? Are you going to abandon them every time there's a crisis at work? Maybe we should talk about that, I said, suddenly seeing our future with painful clarity. Because I'm not planning to give up my career when we get married. I thought you understood that. I understood that you had a job. I didn't realize you were planning to choose that job over your family every time there's a conflict. It's not choosing one over the other, it's called balance. James laughed bitterly. Balance? You've worked until midnight every night this week. You missed my company picnic last month because of some presentation. You turned down dinner with my parents tonight because of a client crisis. Where exactly is the balance in that? Where's the balance in you expecting me to drop everything whenever you want my attention? Where's the balance in you planning our entire future around your career, while mine is just an inconvenience to be managed? The fight that followed was epic and revelatory. James accused me of misleading him about my priorities and my willingness to be a proper wife. I accused him of trying to change me into someone else, someone who would be happy to live in his shadow. We said things that couldn't be taken back, revealed fundamental incompatibilities we'd both been ignoring. By morning, I knew the engagement was over. James moved out that afternoon, taking the ring and leaving behind a bitter lecture about my selfishness and my inability to prioritize what really mattered. I hope your career keeps you warm at night, he said as he packed his things, because you're going to end up alone if you keep choosing ambition over love. I sat in my empty condo, emotionally drained but oddly relieved. For the first time in months, I could breathe freely. I could work late without guilt, make plans without asking permission, have opinions without worrying about his approval. Then I had to tell my family. I called my mother first, thinking she might understand. Her reaction was immediate and devastating. "You're throwing away the best thing that ever happened to you." She sobbed into the phone. "James is a wonderful man, and you're being selfish and stubborn. You think your little job is more important than your future happiness?" "My job isn't little, Mom. I'm a director at a successful company. I manage a team of 12 people and handle million-dollar accounts." "None of that matters if you end up alone," she cried. "Careers don't love you back, Rebecca. They don't give you children or companionship or security. You're 31 years old, and you just threw away your best chance at real happiness." "Dad was worse. I'm ashamed of you," he said flatly when he got on the phone. "We raised you better than this." James deserves a woman who appreciates him, not some career-obsessed feminist who thinks she's too good for commitment. Victoria's response was typically self-centered. "Do you know how embarrassing this is? I've already told all my friends about your wedding. We've bought dresses, booked hotel rooms. What am I supposed to say now? That my sister chose her job over marriage?" Nathan, surprisingly, was the most supportive. "If you weren't happy, you did the right thing," he said quietly when he called me privately later that evening. "But maybe don't expect Mom and Dad to see it that way anytime soon. You know how they are about this stuff." "This stuff?" "Traditional roles, family expectations. They really thought James was perfect for you." "Perfect for who they wanted me to be," I corrected, "not for who I actually am." The next few months were brutal. Every family gathering became a therapy session about my mistake. Extended relatives who'd heard about the broken engagement felt free to share their opinions about my priorities and my chances of finding another suitable man at my age. Mom developed stress-related health issues that everyone blamed on my selfish decision. I stopped attending family events. I screened their phone calls. I focused on my work, which was thriving. Our team had saved that major client, and I'd been recognized with a company-wide award for my leadership during the crisis. I'd also been approached by 2 competitors offering senior positions with significant salary increases. But my professional success only seemed to fuel their disapproval. "She thinks she's so important now." I overheard Victoria telling someone at a cousin's birthday party I'd reluctantly attended, acting like her job is more important than family. Poor James dodged a bullet. 6 months after the breakup, I'd started dating again. Nothing serious, just casual dinners and movies with colleagues and friends. I was rediscovering who I was outside of James's expectations and my family's approval. The freedom was intoxicating. I could make plans without consultation, express opinions without worrying about their reception, pursue opportunities without justifying them to anyone. That's when I met Aaron. Aaron was everything James wasn't: spontaneous, creative, supportive of my ambitions. He was a freelance graphic designer who'd built his business from nothing, working with small nonprofits and social justice organizations. He had tattoos that told stories, rode a vintage motorcycle he'd restored himself, and thought my career success was incredibly attractive. "You're a powerhouse," he said after I told him about leading my team through the client crisis. That's amazing. Tell me more about your strategy for managing the team dynamics during that kind of pressure. For the first time in years, someone was genuinely interested in my professional life, not looking for ways to minimize it or redirect my attention elsewhere. We'd been dating 3 months when I finally decided to introduce him to my family. I knew they wouldn't approve. Aaron wasn't their idea of suitable husband material, but I was tired of hiding important parts of my life from the people who claimed to love me. The dinner was a disaster from the moment Aaron walked through the door. Dad barely spoke to him beyond cold pleasantries, spending most of the evening asking pointed questions about his business prospects and long-term stability. Mom kept mentioning James and how much they missed him, making sure to emphasize his professional success and family connections. Victoria made pointed comments about the importance of compatibility in a relationship and how crucial it was to choose someone who shared your values. He seems interesting, Mom said after Aaron left, the word delivered like a medical diagnosis. He's different from James, Dad added, making it clear this wasn't a compliment. Very different, Victoria chimed in. I mean, a motorcycle? Really, Rebecca? At your age? I'm 32, not 80, I said defensively. That's exactly my point. She continued, you're at an age where you should be thinking seriously about your future, about stability and security and building something lasting. This feels like a midlife crisis. Nathan, to his credit, tried to be diplomatic. He seems like a nice guy. Creative types can be really interesting to talk to. Creative types don't usually make reliable husbands, Dad said pointedly. There's a reason women are attracted to stability, Rebecca. It's biology. Deep down, you need someone who can provide for you and protect you. Over the following months, their disapproval of Aaron became another weapon in their arsenal of disappointment. Every conversation included subtle and not so subtle digs about my questionable judgment and my pattern of making poor choices. I just worry about you, Mom would say during our increasingly strained phone calls. You're not getting any younger, and you keep choosing men who can't give you what you need. First you threw away James, who could have given you everything, and now you're wasting time with this artist person who probably can't even afford health insurance. Aaron has health insurance, I would respond, and a successful business, and he makes me happy. Happiness isn't everything, sweetheart. Security matters too, love matters, the kind of stable, mature love that builds families and lasts decades. The implication was always clear. What I had with Aaron wasn't real love, just infatuation or rebellion or some other temporary condition that would eventually give way to reality. The breaking point came at Victoria's baby shower 8 months after I'd started dating Aaron seriously. I'd been looking forward to the event, despite the family tension. Victoria was having her first child and I was excited about becoming an aunt. I'd carefully chosen a beautiful gift, a handmade wooden crib mobile from a local artist that I thought Victoria would love. I arrived with the gift and my best attempt at a pleasant attitude. The afternoon was going well enough until Mom announced she had special news to share with all the assembled women. I ran into James at the grocery store last week, she said, her voice bright with false cheer that made my stomach clench. He's engaged. To a lovely girl named Catherine who works as a pediatric nurse at Children's Hospital. Isn't that wonderful? She seems so sweet and family-oriented. The implication was clear. James had found a real woman, someone who understood what mattered, someone unlike me. That's great, I said evenly, focusing on my piece of cake. I'm happy for him. Are you? Victoria asked pointedly, one hand resting on her growing belly, because it seems like you missed out on something really special. Catherine already volunteers at the hospital's family support programs and has talked about staying home with children when they come. Everything I never was, I said quietly. Everything you chose not to be, Mom corrected. There's a difference, sweetheart. Catherine understands that some things are more important than career advancement. Victoria nodded enthusiastically. When I met her last week, James brought her by the boutique to introduce her. She was so interested in hearing about my pregnancy experience. She asked all the right questions about balancing work and family, about priorities and values. She really gets it. Gets what? What being a woman is actually about? My Aunt Carol chimed in from across the room. Supporting your husband, creating a loving home, raising children to be good people, not chasing some fantasy about having it all. The conversation continued in that vein for another hour. thinly veiled criticisms of my choices, comparisons between Catherine's apparent perfection and my obvious defects, speculation about whether I'd ever figure out what really matters in life. "I hope you're learning something from James's example," Mom said as I prepared to leave early. "Some men are worth keeping and some opportunities don't come twice." I left without responding and didn't speak to any of them for 2 weeks. When Mom finally called, it was to deliver an ultimatum disguised as an invitation. "We're having a family meeting," she said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "This Sunday at 6, we need to discuss your attitude and your relationship with that man you're seeing. This family dysfunction has gone on long enough." "What family dysfunction?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Your dysfunction," she clarified. "Your selfishness, your poor choices, your disrespect for family values. We've been patient, but enough is enough. You're tearing this family apart with your behavior." "How am I tearing the family apart?" "By constantly choosing yourself over us, by dating inappropriate men and making career decisions without considering how they affect the family, by refusing to listen to advice from people who love you and want what's best for you." That's when I knew things had gone too far. Sunday arrived gray and cold, matching my mood as I drove to my childhood home. I'd spent the week trying to prepare for whatever confrontation awaited me, but nothing could have readied me for what I found. They were all there: Mom, Dad, Victoria, Nathan, even Victoria's husband Paul. Arranged around the living room like a tribunal, with the chair clearly intended for me positioned facing them all like a defendant's seat. "Sit down, Rebecca," Dad said without preamble. "We need to talk." I remained standing, sensing that sitting would put me at a psychological disadvantage. "About what?" "About your behavior over the past year," Mom said, her voice tight with disapproval. "About the way you've been treating this family and the choices you've been making." "What choices specifically?" Victoria leaned forward, clearly relishing her role as prosecutor. "Breaking up with James was just the beginning. Now you're dating some tattooed artist who rides a motorcycle and probably doesn't even have a 401k. You've missed 3 family events in the past 2 months. You barely call Mom anymore. You act like you're too good for us." "I work full-time and have my own life," I said calmly. "That's not acting too good for anyone." "It is when your family comes second to everything else," Dad said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Work, friends, inappropriate men. Anything seems more important to you than the people who raised you and love you." "Love me?" The words came out sharper than I intended. "Is that what you call it? Because it feels a lot more like conditional approval based on whether I'm making choices you agree with." Mom gasped as if I'd slapped her. "How can you say that? We've always supported you." "When?" I challenged, feeling years of frustration bubbling to the surface. "When have you supported me? When I got my promotion and you suggested I was getting too ambitious? When I broke up with James and you called me selfish? When I started dating Aaron and you made it clear he wasn't good enough? When exactly has my happiness mattered more than your approval?" The room went silent except for Mom's sniffling. Dad's face was red with anger. "We're your parents," he said slowly, each word deliberate. "We know what's best for you better than you do. And what's best for you is getting your life back on track, ending this ridiculous relationship, finding a stable man who can provide for you properly, and focusing on what really matters." "Which is what exactly?" "Family," Nathan said quietly, speaking for the first time since I'd arrived. "Taking care of the people who love you instead of chasing career success that'll never make you truly happy." I looked around the room at these people who claimed to love me, seeing clearly for the first time how little they actually knew or valued the person I'd become. "You want to know what would make me truly happy?" I asked, my voice gaining strength. "Being accepted for who I am instead of constantly criticized for who I'm not. Having my achievements celebrated instead of minimized. Dating someone who supports my ambitions instead of trying to diminish them. Being treated like an adult who can make her own decisions instead of a child who needs constant correction." "That's exactly the selfish attitude we're talking about," Victoria said, her voice sharp with righteousness. "Everything is about you, your needs, your wants. What about what the family needs? What about our feelings? What about the embarrassment and worry you're causing?" "What does the family need from me?" I asked. "Respect," Dad said firmly. "Gratitude for everything we've done for you, better judgment about the men you date and the priorities you set. Some indication that family values matter more than your personal ambitions." And if I can't give you those things? Mom looked up from her tissues, her eyes red but determined. Then maybe you need to think about whether you really want to be part of this family. The ultimatum hung in the air between us: choose their version of me or lose them entirely. I thought about the little girl who'd begged for their approval, who'd twisted herself into knots trying to be good enough. I thought about the young woman who'd sacrificed opportunities to meet their expectations, who'd watched her siblings receive praise for accomplishments that were ignored when they were mine. I thought about the adult I'd become: successful, independent, capable of making my own choices and living with the consequences. I thought about Aaron, waiting at his apartment with Chinese takeout and a movie he'd picked because he knew I'd had a stressful week. I thought about my colleagues who respected my judgment and my friends who celebrated my successes. I thought about the life I'd built for myself, imperfect but authentic. I don't want to lose my family, I said finally, my voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. But I won't lose myself to keep you. I turned and walked toward the door. Rebecca, wait. Nathan called after me, jumping up from his chair. Don't do this, we can work this out. I stopped but didn't turn around. I'm not doing anything. I'm just refusing to keep pretending that I'm the problem here. If you walk out that door, Dad said, his voice cold and final, don't expect to come crawling back when your life falls apart. We won't be here to pick up the pieces when your poor choices catch up with you. I understand, I said, opening the door and stepping into the cold evening air, but I'd rather deal with the consequences of my own choices than live with the consequences of yours. I left them sitting in their judgment circle and drove straight to Aaron's apartment. How did it go? He asked, taking one look at my face and pulling me into his arms without waiting for an answer. I think I just got disowned, I said, surprised by how relieved I sounded even as the tears finally came. Good, he said firmly, holding me tighter. No one who really loves you would make you choose between being yourself and being accepted. That was 2 years ago. In the time since, I've been promoted to senior director, moved in with Aaron, and built a life that reflects my actual values instead of my family's expectations. I've traveled to places they'd never approve of, pursued goals they'd never understand, and made choices based on my own judgment rather than their approval. And I've never been happier. There have been difficult moments, holidays alone, birthday cards from relatives asking why I'm doing this to my poor mother, wedding invitations that pointedly don't include a +1 because we weren't sure about your situation. Nathan has reached out a few times, usually after a few drinks, apologizing for the family's behavior and asking if we can work things out. I miss you, he said during his last call, his voice slurred with emotion. They all do, even if they won't admit it. I miss you too, I told him honestly, but I won't go back to being someone I'm not just to keep the peace. What would it take, he asked, for you to come back? What would they have to do? I thought about it for a long time, watching Aaron work on a design project at his desk across the room. An apology would be a start, recognition that they were wrong to try to control my life. Acceptance of Aaron without conditions, respect for my choices even when they disagree with them. Nathan was quiet for a long moment. That's a lot to ask. It's the bare minimum for any healthy relationship, I corrected. If they can't give me that, then we don't really have a relationship worth saving. 6 months ago, I heard through mutual acquaintances that Mom had been hospitalized with stress-related heart palpitations. Part of me wanted to reach out, to show up at the hospital with flowers and an offer to set aside our differences. But I knew that my presence would only create more stress for everyone involved, and that any reconciliation attempt would come with expectations I wasn't prepared to meet. I sent flowers and a card wishing her well, but I didn't visit. Last month, Victoria had her second baby, a son this time, after her daughter. I found out through social media, along with everyone else who'd been cut out of the family inner circle. I felt sad for the aunt I'd never get to be, for the cousins who wouldn't know me, but I didn't reach out. The pattern was too established, the wounds too deep. 3 weeks ago, Aaron proposed. He did it perfectly, no family pressure, no expectations beyond our mutual love and respect. Just the two of us on a weekend hiking trip, with a ring he'd designed himself incorporating elements that reflected my personality rather than traditional expectations. I want to build a life with you, he said, down on one knee among the wildflowers we'd stopped to photograph. Not the life anyone else thinks we should have, but the one we actually want. I said yes without hesitation, feeling more certain about this decision than I'd ever felt about anything involving James. We're planning a small ceremony next fall with friends and chosen family, the people who've supported us individually and as a couple. No ultimatums, no conditions, no judgment. Just celebration of two people who found each other and chose to build something beautiful together. I know my biological family won't be there. I know they'll hear about it eventually and have opinions about the wedding, my dress, my choice of venue, everything they weren't consulted about. I know they'll probably interpret my happiness as a deliberate rejection of them. But I also know something they never taught me. I am not responsible for their emotions, their choices, or their inability to love me as I am. My therapist, yes, I started seeing someone after the family intervention, and it's been incredibly helpful, says that some people are so invested in their version of who you should be that they can't see who you actually are. She says that choosing yourself over their expectations isn't selfish, it's necessary for your mental health and authentic relationships. Families can be the most toxic environments when they refuse to accept growth and change, Dr. Amanda Foster explained during one of our sessions. They get stuck in patterns where love becomes conditional on compliance, and anyone who challenges those patterns becomes the problem. That's exactly what happened to me. I became the problem because I refused to shrink myself to fit their narrow definition of acceptable womanhood. The hardest part has been dealing with the guilt. Even now, 2 years later, I sometimes wake up feeling like I abandoned my family, like I'm selfish for choosing my own happiness over their comfort. But then I remember what my life was like before, the constant criticism, the impossible standards, the way they made me feel small and wrong for wanting things they didn't understand. I remember the way James used to dismiss my work achievements, how he'd change the subject whenever I talked about projects I was excited about. I remember my father's face when I tried to tell him about my promotion, the way he'd nod politely before launching into praise for Nathan's latest mediocre accomplishment. I remember my mother's sighs whenever I expressed opinions that didn't align with her traditional values. Most importantly, I remember how it felt to constantly second-guess myself, to question whether my ambitions were too much, my standards too high, my expectations unreasonable. Living authentically means accepting that some people will never understand your choices. It means being okay with disappointing people who refuse to see your worth. It means choosing relationships that support your growth over those that demand your shrinking. Aaron understands this in a way my family never could. When I got another promotion last month, senior vice president now, with a team of 25 people under my management, he took me out to celebrate. We went to my favorite restaurant, and he asked detailed questions about my new responsibilities, my vision for the department, the challenges I was excited to tackle. "I'm so proud of you," he said, raising his glass in a toast. "You've worked incredibly hard for this, and you deserve every bit of recognition you're getting." Compare that to my family's reaction when I got my first director position. "That's nice, dear," my mother had said. "But don't let it go to your head. Remember that work isn't everything." The difference is stark and heartbreaking. Last week, Nathan sent me a Facebook message, the first contact I'd had from any of them in months. It was late at night, and I could tell from the rambling nature of the message that he'd been drinking. "I keep thinking about what you said," he wrote, "about us not supporting you. I've been watching Mom and Dad with Victoria's kids, and I see what you mean. They brag about everything Emma does, every little drawing, every word she says, but they never talked about your job that way. I never realized how different it was." The message continued for several paragraphs, with Nathan recounting memories I'd forgotten, times when my achievements had been overshadowed by his or Victoria's lesser accomplishments, occasions when my needs had been dismissed in favor of theirs, moments when I'd clearly been treated as less important than my siblings. "I don't know how to fix it," he concluded. "Mom and Dad are still convinced you're going through some kind of rebellious phase and that you'll come to your senses eventually. Victoria thinks you're just bitter about James and taking it out on the family. But I think you were right to leave. I think we were terrible to you, and I'm sorry." I stared at that message for a long time before responding. Part of me wanted to call him immediately, to pour out all the hurt and frustration I'd been carrying. Part of me wanted to invite him to coffee, to see if we could rebuild some kind of relationship without the toxic dynamics that had defined our family. But I also knew that individual relationships with family members who remained embedded in the system that had hurt me would be complicated and potentially painful. Nathan's acknowledgement was meaningful, but it didn't change the fundamental dysfunction that had driven me away. "Thank you for saying that," I finally wrote back. "It means more than you know. I hope someday we can have a relationship that's separate from all the family drama, but I understand if that's not possible given everything." He never responded, and I haven't heard from him since. I think acknowledging the truth about our family dynamics was as far as he could go without having to confront his own role in maintaining them. The wedding planning has been a completely different experience this time around. Instead of navigating family opinions and traditional expectations, Aaron and I are creating something that reflects who we actually are. We're having this ceremony at a small art gallery that showcases local artists. My dress is a deep burgundy instead of white, a choice that would have horrified my mother but makes me feel beautiful and authentic. Our vows will be words we write ourselves, not traditional promises that feel empty to us. Most importantly, everyone who will be there genuinely wants to celebrate our relationship. My college roommate Emma is flying in from Seattle to be my maid of honor. My work team has already planned an office celebration. Aaron's friends and family have embraced me completely, asking about my work and my interests with genuine curiosity and respect. "I can't wait for you to meet my Aunt Sarah," Aaron said after a family dinner with his relatives last month. "She's a retired engineer who started her own consulting firm when she was 50. I think you two would have a lot to talk about." The contrast with my own family couldn't be more obvious. Aaron's family asks about my career because they're interested, not because they're looking for ways to criticize or redirect my attention. They celebrate his success as an artist and mine as a businesswoman with equal enthusiasm. They treat our relationship as a partnership between equals, not a traditional arrangement where one person's needs supersede the other's. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have looked like if I'd grown up in a family like Aaron's. Would I have been more confident in my choices? Would I have pursued opportunities more aggressively? Would I have recognized James's controlling behavior earlier instead of mistaking it for care? But I try not to spend too much time on those hypotheticals. I can't change my past, but I can control my future, and for the first time in my life, that future feels entirely my own. 6 months ago, I was contacted by a women's leadership organization asking if I'd be interested in speaking at their annual conference. They'd heard about my career trajectory and wanted me to share my story with other women navigating corporate advancement. "We're particularly interested in your perspective on work, life balance, and family expectations," the organizer explained. "So many women struggle with guilt about prioritizing their careers, especially when family members don't understand or support their choices." I accepted the speaking engagement, and last month I stood in front of 300 professional women sharing my story. I talked about the pressure to choose between career success and family approval, about the way conditional love can make you doubt your own judgment, about the courage required to choose authenticity over acceptance. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of women approached me afterward with their own stories of family disapproval, career sacrifices, and the struggle to define success on their own terms. "I thought I was the only one," said a young lawyer whose parents wanted her to quit her job and move back to their small town. "I thought I was being selfish for wanting more than what they planned for me." "You're not selfish," I told her. "You're just refusing to live someone else's version of your life." That conversation reminded me why walking away from my family was worth it, not just for my own peace of mind but for the example it sets for other women who are struggling with similar choices. Sometimes being true to yourself means standing alone. Sometimes love requires saying no to people who claim to have your best interests at heart, but really just want you to conform to their expectations. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is trust your own judgment over the voices of people who've never bothered to understand who you really are. My name is Rebecca Torres, and 2 years ago I chose myself over my family's approval. It was the hardest decision I've ever made, and the best choice I've ever made. I lost a family that never truly saw me, but I gained a life that's entirely mine. I lost relationships built on conditions and expectations, but I found love that celebrates who I actually am. I lost the comfort of familiar dysfunction, but I gained the peace that comes from living authentically. Sometimes the people who claim to know what's best for you are the ones standing in the way of your best life, and sometimes the only way to find your real family is to stop settling for the one you were born into. The invitations for my wedding went out last week. Simple, elegant cards announcing the marriage of Rebecca Torres and Aaron Mitchell. No mention of parents or family traditions, just two people choosing to build a life together. I know my biological family won't be there. I know they're probably telling people I've lost my way, that I've chosen career and rebellion over love and stability. I know they still believe that someday I'll realize my mistake and come crawling back, apologetic and ready to conform. But I also know something they never understood. I am exactly where I'm supposed to be, with exactly the right person, living exactly the life I choose. And that's worth more than all their conditional approval combined. If you're reading this and struggling with family members who make their love contingent on your compliance, I want you to know that you deserve better. You deserve to be celebrated for your achievements, not criticized for your ambitions. You deserve relationships that support your growth, not limit your potential. You are not selfish for choosing your own happiness. You are not ungrateful for refusing to shrink yourself to fit other people's expectations. You are not broken for wanting respect along with love. Some families are worth fighting for, others are worth fighting against, and sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk away and build something better. Have you ever had to choose between family approval and personal happiness? Have you ever had to set boundaries with people who claim to love you but couldn't accept who you really are? Share your story, because there are others out there who need to know they're not alone. Remember, you are worthy of unconditional love, and anyone who makes their affection contingent on your compliance doesn't actually love you, they love their idea of who you should be. Your life is yours to live. Choose wisely, choose bravely, and choose yourself.